And I believe I'm supposed to call the roll, right, to get
Yes.
started? All right, just to confirm that you're here and that you can hear me, we'll start with Sandra.
Here.
Sam?
Here.
All right, I'm here, and I know we're without Aaron today. So why don't we go to the second item on the agenda, approval of the minutes from our meeting on December 7th, 2020. Has anybody had a chance to review those or have any questions, comments, or feedback?
On quick review, I motion that we accept the minutes.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded, made by Sam, seconded by Sandra. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. We'll ask for Sam's
Roll
vote.
call, right?
Yes, Sam,
Yes.
Sandra,
Yes.
and I vote in the affirmative as well. Minutes pass. Good morning, Mark. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Sorry, the officers meeting was not in my calendar this morning, but Heidi rapidly took care of that problem. So sorry to be a few minutes late.
That's okay. So why don't we go to the third item on the agenda, which is review of contracts, and whether Mark or Rebecca wants to start, I'll leave that up to the two of you.
No, I can start, but glad for Rebecca to jump in on contracts that she's familiar with, which is many of them. If you'll allow me to get the documents up on my screen, sorry. I guess we can look at pass-through first. I want to tell you I devoted entirely too much time to trying to correct the spelling of the word pass-through in the title of the contract of the document, but in the link, but I couldn't do that. So many of these relate to the release of our Accelerating Climate Resiliency Grant Program, which is funded by the Barr Foundation and which assists municipalities with climate resilience activities. It is the effort to move beyond planning directly into implementation. This year, we not only got an increase in our grant amount, but when the Barr Foundation saw, or when we saw and conveyed to them, that they were just such incredible applications beyond what the fund could handle, they actually put some additional money into the program at the last minute, and enabled us to, I think, cover another 2 or 3 projects. We also split the work up this year so that there
Mark,
are some.
we don't have this on our screen, right?
Okay, let me.
No, it was sent to you this morning, Sandra, and Heidi can put it on the screen if she wishes. I'm reading from the document on my drive. Sandra, should people just look at it on their own, or do you want Heidi to put it on the screen?
screen? But that's okay. I'll just listen. I mean, I just don't have it open, but.
So moving on, I just wanted to say that we also try to make some of the projects, we created sort of a separate category for really larger projects that we could help out in a more dramatic way than would previously have been the case. In fact, I feel that all the numbers are up pretty substantially, but particularly looking at awards like Chelsea's, we're really trying to give an amount of money that can assist with climate resilience in a meaningful and dramatic way. And that was intentional on the part of the program. So these are very substantive activities. They are, the MAPC runs the grant program. Darcy Schofield ran that prior to her departure at the end of last month. And obviously we will be conducting ongoing monitoring of the implementation of these grants. I don't know if this is the full number of grants. It may be that a few others will leak in during the first couple of weeks of January, but this is most of it. And I think those are the only elements of the pass-through contracts that I particularly wanted to mention. I don't know if Rebecca has anything she'd like to add.
No, I would just add, it's a 2-year program and we're giving out $1.4 million. So it's substantial and very exciting that we're actually helping to fund some capital projects. So the Chelsea project, for example, is working with Green Roots to look at establishing a microgrid in Chelsea. It's a really exciting project. And there's also a community of practice that we will be doing with this project as well. So we'll be able to learn from kind of really what we're hoping are innovative projects. So exciting to get this off the ground.
Okay, are there any questions on that program or on the pass-through contracts generally? Okay. Let's move on to revenue. Let's do it. Just do it on the screen this time. If Heidi, you're able to share the revenue document that I circulated this morning. There it is. Great. Okay, so I'll comment on a few of these. We've been doing a good amount of work in Salem, as I think most people know. And the Bridge Street neck rezoning is something that has come up before. It actually failed the first time around. We're having another go at it now. I think the mayor and also Councilor Madore, it's her district. Christine, being a former staff member of MAPC, as I think most of you know, have done a considerable amount of political work to prepare for this. And so we're going to give it another run and see if we can get that working out. I'm very, very excited about the project that is funded by EEA through the city of Cambridge as the lead city, enabling us to do a regional plan for dealing with and responding to extreme heat in the Metro Boston region. As you can see, that is a substantial grant from MAPC. All of the Metro mayors communities will be involved in that project. And I think it will have a lot to say and a lot of valuable advice and recommendations for the rest of the region as well. We're going to definitely see if we can spread some of this work into other parts of the region. And also want to thank the City of Cambridge for being the primary sponsor on this effort. You will see that there are two Mass Department of Public Health contract amendments. One, item number 3 there, line 10, is an additional $75,000. And then further down is another over $400,000. Both of those are additional grants that DPH received and which they made available to us for additional support to local boards of health. We don't expect that's going to be the end because of additional funding that is coming through a variety of sources, both federal and state. We've tried throughout the pandemic to stand up additional financial and staff support for local boards of health. That is passing through MAPC in our Region 3, as it's called. And it is also passing through other entities in other parts of our region and also in other parts of the state. We help the communities to develop plans, small plans. We don't want to overemphasize the planning aspect here. It's mostly about implementation, but to develop plans for the release of the money, and then we monitor their expenditures thereof. And both of those contracts are major additions with small amounts retained for MAPC in the second case, not in the smaller first one. A number of interesting planning activities after that. I think that not all that much need to go through them individually. I would note that we continue to work with a lot of communities on assisting them with their virtual town meetings, and there is additional work coming up in that regard for the spring town meetings, which we're working on now. I think I'm accurate to say that Sasha, who's quietly monitoring this meeting, is part of the overall effort to assist with all of that. Big thanks to her and to her colleagues in community engagement, in data services and municipal collaboration for their work with individual towns on their town meetings. Heidi, if you could scroll down a little bit, I'm just going to see if there are any others that I want to mention there. I don't think so. It's almost at the bottom.
Oh,
That's all right. I actually
I'm
think
having a little problem.
I think it's Blue Hills and the larger DPH contract amendment. And after that, I think it's work in Norwood for their town meeting. I think that's the bottom of the document. So let me stop there, see if Rebecca has anything to add and if there are any questions.
Okay.
Now we've lost it from the screen, so I don't know if you folks can still see it if you have questions.
Sam has a question.
Yeah, Mark, quick question on the extreme heat. That's a follow-on, I think, from work you did last summer. Is that
Rebecca
correct?
would know that.
So it is related to the work that we did last summer, but not a follow-on effort. This is actually a big MVP grant that we got that we actually applied for before we did that work, but it's related. Although this is also more focused on long-term changes to try to mitigate heat as opposed to the short-term work that we did over the summer to really try to alleviate heat in the moment kind of due to COVID.
Can I ask about that work? Were you able to have any successes in terms of the heat relief issues around COVID?
Yeah, we had a lot of successes there. I'd say, the biggest one, and Brooks Winter on our staff gets a lot of credit for this. We actually partnered with probably 6 different community-based organizations to do a large procurement of air conditioning units, and then use those community-based organizations to get those units out to folks that needed it the most. And I think we were really helpful from a procurement perspective and helping those community-based nonprofits actually access those. And there were a lot of other projects on the ground. For example, Revere is using some of that funding to rent hotel rooms that provide relief. Either they're first for cooling, they're now using that for heating and or for quarantining due to COVID. So a lot of great projects that came out of that, as well as I think strengthened relationships between us and community-based organizations, as well as, I heard a lot on the ground about different groups working together that hadn't worked together before. So
Now, I asked partly because I'm connected to a nonprofit here in Cambridge that was grappling with the same issue about cooling for people who otherwise didn't have options. And
the city of Cambridge, while not eligible for that grant program because of the metrics that we used, has actually been participating in the extreme heat task force that was pulled together because of that grant. And city staff are always on the phone and have pretty innovative projects they've been working on there.
Okay, one other unrelated question to both you and Mark about the federal dollars. Last I heard, there's no money to states, but I haven't followed it closely, so I'm just curious what the status is there.
Well, it's no money directly for state operations. At the same time, a lot of the money will flow through the Commonwealth, and they have a fair degree of flexibility about how to use it. We still will be pushing in the new session as a fairly high priority for direct support for state governments and local governments if there is to be another stimulus package, which I think may be decided in Macon and Savannah tomorrow. So more than anything else.
You mean in a courtroom in Savannah?
No, well, maybe. I hope not. But anyway, Heidi can keep that out of the mix.
Yeah.
We're all hoping there'll be another stimulus package, but I think it's going to take a few weeks before we really know, months maybe, but before we know whether that's a real possibility or not.
Okay. I was curious.
I'm not counting on it. So I don't think any of us should count.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I would say, though, significantly, there was a 1-year extension of the CARES Act funding. And for the state, I think that's really important. For our cities and towns, it's a big challenge. Some of them, I think, followed the guidance and spent all the money for fear that it would go away on December 31st. And others played the game where they didn't spend it all and hoped that there would be an extension. And so I think it's going to leave our cities and towns in very different places in terms of the resources that they have to address the crisis.
Interesting. Yeah.
People were basically asked to take a bet. You think Congress is going to extend the deadline or not? And the governor's and administration's strong recommendation was to spend. Some followed that, some didn't. And we all know how the bet turned out. It was extended to the end of the year. One of the few things actually that they extended in a lengthy way, like the eviction moratorium was only extended for a month, but they sort of left that to the new administration. But thankfully, the CARES Act expenditures deadline was extended all the way to the end of December 2021.
So, and Sam, I'll just quickly to add some context. I think for the most part, it was a little bit of like which side of the ledger you were going to let blood from, where I think a lot of the communities that, not a lot, I know some of the communities that didn't spend all their CARES money chose to spend their own general fund money on some things to protect the CARES, while the others that didn't do that spent down all the CARES but haven't yet had to touch general fund money. So it's sort of, I think it was a little bit of a pick your poison and when you feel the pain type situation.
Are there other questions on contracts? I don't know.
Nope.
I would note that overnight I received a couple of small technical corrections to the contracts documents from members of 2 departments. So I'm going to just internalize those and send you a revised version. They're non-substantive, but mainly so Heidi will have the correct document for the record.
Great. Well, thank you, Mark. So why don't we move on to hiring and staff updates?
I'll turn that over to Rebecca.
Sure. So no hiring update, no new staff members, but we do, Mark and I actually have a number of finalist interviews in the coming week. So I will say we do have a number of positions open right now. I'll remind everyone that these are positions that we previously did not fill. So they're not new positions. They are folks that have left either this year or actually last year. And we've now, given our revenue picture, decided to fill those open positions. So far, I'm hearing from hiring teams, we're getting really excellent applicants, and I'm hopeful over the next few weeks, we'll have some announcements of new staff members to help fill up our departments.
What do we have up now? We have legal, we have a counsel position to replace Rosalind Valsamond. We have a position that will be a generalist in land use, but we expect at least in the first year, we'll be working largely on economic development issues, helping with the expenditure of our EDA funds and other things like that. I'm hopeful that we will shortly have a position open in environment to replace Darcy Schofield. Possibly we will have one in housing. Still some back and forth and uncertainty in that regard, because it's partly related to the need to provide additional support, but it's also partly related to a more short-term need to make up for the hours of an individual who is on leave currently. And I think I'm missing a few, Rebecca.
Transportation,
Right.
And clean energy.
Yeah.
We have a lot of open planning positions right now, but
yep.
Our teams are doing the process, and I think we're getting great candidates. Sandra?
So I don't know when to bring this up, but Mark, aren't we supposed to revisit your contract this month?
Well, I think you're supposed to, maybe, hopefully not the contract, but unless you folks are doing something that I'm not aware of. But yes, I do think you're right. The salary issue is supposed to be revisited, so we can.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll discuss with Adam. I think Aaron probably would have remembered that and brought it up. Maybe I'll talk with Aaron about it afterward, Adam about it afterwards, and we can figure out a way to deal with it at the next meeting. Okay.
Great.
That sounds good.
Thank you, Sandra, for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you for the reminder.
How's MAPC doing on the administrative side? Do you have all your finance, et cetera, people? HR?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece is that, we had put off hiring the director of operations midway through the year. So we have a job description that we're reviewing, and I'm really hopeful that we can get that position filled. I will say, the pressure on the overhead budget is still, really, there's a lot of pressure. We're running right up at our kind of raised level, and we are using reserves to help, take some expenses. There's a lot of unforeseen software expenses, things to process things remotely, Zoom, et cetera. And, each of these contracts ends up being between $10,000 and $20,000 for each of the products. And so that really starts to add up. And that hurts on the administrative side. So we'll definitely be talking about that, Sam, as we start the mid-year budget and how to account for that in the mid-year budget. Because unfortunately, next year I envision us or maybe fortunately, I hope, I envision us having our kind of normal kind of in-office expenses, along with, I don't think we're going to move away from continuing to use these products. We have to figure that out.
Right.
It will not be a surprise to anybody that the folks who make them and sell them can sell them at top dollar at this point in time. So I was signing checks yesterday. Sheila delivered, I think, about 20 pounds of material to my door, which she will pick up at 10:30 this morning. And I think there was a $13,000 check and a $23,000 check, both of which were related to these kinds of expenses that Rebecca's talking about. It's very important we have managed to keep things running more smoothly than most other government agencies that I'm aware of, but it does come at a price.
Thanks.
You're on mute, Adam.
Sorry, any other agenda questions about this agenda item? Okay. Seeing none, why don't we move to number 5, which is the COVID response?
And could I ask Adam for just a moment if I don't have the agenda on the screen, but I think the next is either the Metro Common update or the climate update.
There, unless I'm looking at a dated one, I don't see a climate update, but Metro Common is next.
Okay, I thought we inserted the climate update as well, but in any
Yes,
event, if Metro Common
I-
is next.
Okay.
Maybe you didn't. It's okay. We can take it up under other business. But if Metro Common is next, could maybe we ask Sasha to let Eric Hove know that he should come on? Okay, thank you. So on COVID response, I'll start off and then I know Rebecca will have more to add. We are at a delicate moment that I suspect is going to continue for about the next month or two, where we are on the one hand continuing to work with our cities and towns and with the administration on immediate actions to address the surge, which honestly often include discussions of rollbacks and shutdowns of various kinds, while at the same time trying to pivot and look forward to encouraging more use of the vaccine, to assist local communities with administering the vaccine, particularly to first responders, to help establish communication campaigns that make sure that skeptical parts of the population will in fact utilize the vaccine, and continuing to work on issues of testing and tracing going forward as ways of supporting the vaccine effort. Testing in schools being a big topic of conversation right now. And it's, like everything else that we faced as a staff here, it's a big load to keep focused on both things because both sides of the equation are important. We are in a very, very difficult time right now. We had 105 deaths in the last report yesterday. Infection rate, positivity rate, hospitalization numbers are all up. And even when we see them go down or dip or level off, we have to remember that that is at a very, very high level currently. So I know that Mayor Driscoll, for example, this is just one example, is working with 9 communities who will be meeting again for a third call, I think, at 1 o'clock this afternoon, focused on the question of whether or not there can or should be, as she thinks there should be, additional rollbacks in those North Shore communities, which total a population of around 250,000, including the big cities in that area, Lynn, Salem, Peabody, Beverly, Gloucester, as well as some of the larger towns. And Mark Fine and Barry Keppert are trying to provide some behind the scenes support to that effort, even though she's really taken the ball and is running with it. We're not directly involved. And, these questions continue to arise about dealing with the issues of rollbacks and the support that's necessary to, I don't want to say make them possible, but make them slightly more practicable or slightly more bearable. For example, additional small business assistance to help businesses that will be even more hurt by the surge and by the rollbacks. At the same time that we're doing that work, it is really important to look forward to the things that honestly are going to be more important in March and April and May and June. And one of the big ones we are focused on right now is this whole issue of communications campaigns based on the best behavioral analysis to try and make sure that sort of the twin groups, I don't want to oversimplify here, but the 2 different groups that tend to have the most reticence about the vaccine are communities that have reason to distrust government actions or the scientific community, particularly but not exclusively within communities of color, and then also communities that have been misled by the Trump administration into believing that COVID is not a serious issue and that a vaccine is not necessarily something they should worry about. So those are two groups. They're very different groups. They have different sensibilities, different proportions in different communities. To be honest, some of us may have more sympathy in one direction than the other, but getting a vaccine into an arm is equally as important regardless of people's political views. And it's very important to recognize that and understand that our efforts, the effort in Foxborough and the effort in Lynn are probably going to be different. They still have the same objective of increasing the number of people that are protected and thereby help to protect the rest of society. So that's some of the work that we're doing at the moment. I'll ask Rebecca to add anything that she wishes to add.
Yeah, I think the big thing that I would add is just reminding folks, if you saw the large announcement that the governor put forward around the close to $700 million of small business assistance, I think it's important just to stop and take a moment. And, I feel like we and our mayors had a big part in pushing for that. And that was, in the end, I think a successful effort. We are also pushing very hard for an economic development bill, which we still don't have. And honestly, I worry that effort might harm the economic development bill, which is something that the team has been working really hard and the mayors on trying to get out, because again, all the assistance we need. But I do want to take a moment. I think that our work and the work of our mayor is really calling out the need for a big package, move the governor there, and as well as, the rollbacks that are in place since the 26th. I think we should, take a lot of credit or a moment to say, I think we really helped move the governor to get there. And so those are two, I think, accomplishments. And then the last thing on the vaccines is that at the same time, we're working very hard, particularly our HMCC and Barry Keppard's staff, on helping communities actually think about how local boards of health should be involved in the vaccine rollout. Right now, very much focused on helping communities come together and partner on local emergency response, police and fire vaccination rollout. And I think we have 8 or 9 different regional collaborations that we've helped pull together, where one community is going to take the lead and all the first responders are going to get vaccinated. So that's other kind of important work that we're working on right now.
Sandra? You're on mute, Sandra.
Sorry. So I have 2 questions, just one about the vaccine and one about the spread. So I'm very distressed to see that very small percentage of nursing home employees are willing to be vaccinated. That seems like an incredible place to put, a huge place to put some effort. So I'm wondering about that. And then my question about the incidents right now is anybody really analyzing why, given our public health resources, and I've probably mentioned this before, I'm sure everybody's thought about it, but why our state has done so poorly? For lessons for the future, it's just unbelievable, really, to me. So that's just kind of, are we really looking at what really happened? Okay, so the administration may have been a little slow on some things, but is that really the place? Is it because of our high income inequality? We have a number of dense cities. Why is it just so shockingly high? People are just in denial about how bad this state really has done, I think. So anyway, so those are just 2 questions and comments. And then I just had a final comment about the economic development bill, which was I don't need to remind everybody the housing choice is in there. And I could say that in Bedford, we have 2 zoning proposals for town meeting that could go down without that provision. So, when are we going to get this? But that's just my own personal worry.
Well, I would just say, on the economic development bill, I'm so disillusioned by the legislature's inability to figure out how to get that done in this 2-year session. But it is not housing choice that's holding it up. It's other policy pieces, is my understanding. On the thinking about what went wrong, I do think we are trying to do some of that work here. I would just say from a structure of our public health system. I mean, there have been people that have been saying for a long time that our kind of current local public health system, 351 departments, underfunded, over mandated in terms of what they can take on is, I think, a huge part. And I see that system just straining and failing day after day. Not that the people that are doing the work aren't, doing tremendous heroic efforts, but I think our current system is, really going to fail. And we are really, I think, hoping to put a vision out or talk about what that might look like. And there is $10 million of funding that we were able to secure in the budget that we are hoping to talk with DPH about how do we use that to help incentivize or think about kind of forming more regional structures, which we're doing on an ad hoc basis, for example, all the time right now on things like testing and homeless shelters, or, on this vaccination piece. So that's one piece. The other piece, I would encourage everyone, I'll ask Heidi to send it around. There were 2 articles in Metro West Daily News over the weekend. I don't know if you saw, but Sam Wong has stepped down as the director of public health in Framingham, and which is just a huge loss to the city. He's on our board, just, he's a gubernatorial appointee to the council. But also I think just kind of speaks to the ways in which the public health system at the local level is kind of failing even the people that are working in it. So I'd encourage everyone to read it. It's a big loss to the field that he's stepping down at this point.
So if I could just comment on that, it seems to me that Massachusetts is relatively unique in not having a county system effectively, and that's probably a huge contributor. So that might be the place to look, is like, what have we lost by not having that structure in general, not only in public health, but especially in public health.
I have 4 quick things. Thanks to word of thanks, 2 comments and a question.
Oh, I'm
Thanks.
sorry, Adam, but then my question about the nursing home employees.
Yeah.
Is anybody targeting that communication outreach?
I think we'll have to check in with Barry on that. I don't know that it's been a communications effort thus far, but it should be if we can figure out a way to assist with that.
I think the one place we've actually been focusing is we've been doing a number of projects working with home healthcare aides and with their union. And so it's slightly different, but it's the next kind of, I think, important tranche of essential employees who I think will also maybe have some reluctance. So that is one place I know they're working. We haven't been working on the kind of nursing home staff yet, but it's important.
And, something that's, I know people are aware of this, is that the racial and ethnic characteristics of home health aides, of nursing home employees, and generally of many parts of the healthcare service industry have changed dramatically in recent years. And while I don't have any evidence of it, it's entirely reasonable to assume that reticence, even within that community, is related to the general concerns and lack of trust among people of color for the vaccine and for other interventions from the medical establishment. And they have to be addressed in similar ways. Some of us joke that we all listen to the governor's annual press conference, and I'm sorry, daily press conferences, almost daily press conferences. And when he comes to the COVID shaming section, we sort of tune out a little bit because we get the lecture every single day and it's basically the same. And the lecturing modality is not necessarily a good way. It's not the most effective way to convince people who have reticence for reasons that they consider to be sensible, and which may be based to some extent in reality, even though we may believe that they're coming to the wrong conclusion. I know Barry and his staff are particularly focused on what the modality of communication ought to be, based not on what makes us feel good, but what actually changes things down the road, and gets a 30% rate of vaccination up to a 50% rate of vaccination. And I think, we're going to be pushing more and more on that communications question and spending more and more time and frankly, more and more money on those efforts over the course of the next month. Sandra, I would say that this state, like many states, not different from many states, but like many states, you know, it could use a commission in reality or figuratively to look at what we did and try and see what was good and what worked and what was bad or what was slow. You know, we still have a situation in this Commonwealth of a very high rate of death. I think 1 out of 7 in nursing homes, for example. And at least for a while, it was more than had died in Germany or Canada. I haven't checked that in a while, and I don't know if it's still true. Both of which are societies that are much larger than the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And I think right now, the political establishment on both the executive and the legislative side is quite pleased with themselves for the most part. And I think they've done just dandy. And honestly, I could accept that perspective for the spring when we knew virtually nothing about this illness. And I am finding it, Rebecca knows this, Adam knows this, I am finding it much, much harder to grapple with in the fall and winter because everybody knew this was coming. And we largely seem to be accepting of it. Not entirely, and less so because of the efforts of this agency and many of our local officials, as Rebecca correctly stated. But I think that is an area where more looking into is needed because there are strategic reasons behind the current decisions that are being made. And I think the strategies value some things over others in ways that are honestly not morally appropriate. But let me pause there, and I think Adam's had some additional questions.
So yeah, and I'll be very brief. I want to reiterate the thanks I've been giving at these officers meetings to you, Mark, and to you, Rebecca, for your work. I have the benefit of being on a lot of the calls that we've all been on together, and the MAPC and the two of you have been such a centering force through all of this that I just feel compelled to continue to thank you for everything that you're doing. My comments, twofold, are in relation to what's been discussed. One, I do, and Rebecca's heard this from me, I remain concerned about vaccination rollout and the lack of inclusivity of local boards of health. I know the capabilities of local boards of health differ literally to every city and town, but at least speaking for my own local board of health, we are ready to rock and roll and start vaccinating people, and we're just not being given the vaccines. And it's very frustrating. We are part of a regional collaborative, as you mentioned, Rebecca, to vaccinate first responders in 4 communities, and we're the lead on that. But more globally, it feels like we have the tools ready to go, and the state's either unaware or unwilling to acknowledge that they have those tools in place. I think tied into that, I don't know the specifics. I don't know Sam Wong or the specifics of the situation, but more globally, I feel like what's happening with some of these local boards of health outside of systemic funding issues is they're working hard. The health staff is working hard to put policies in place at the local level to protect their residents. And the state and the governor doesn't have their back. And they're getting abused by businesses that are rightfully upset about the revenue losses they're experiencing from the closures, but they don't feel like people are backing them up because of political reasons. And again, I don't know if that's the Sam Wong issue, but I know in Arlington that's an issue, and I know it's an issue in other communities too, that people are working very hard from a strictly public health point of view to put measures in place or rollbacks in place or whatever word we want to use, and they're not feeling supported and are feeling like all their efforts are wasted. So I think that's just worth sharing. And then my question is, this is somewhat selfishly, but I think it's beneficial to the group. The Mayor Walsh-led rollback actually expires at the end of business tomorrow, and I haven't heard anything about an extension of that, and so I'm pondering my own role and what an extension might be. Have you heard anything about that?
No, I'm supposed to speak with Mayor Walsh today. I actually spoke with him over the weekend about the economic development bill. I can inquire. I think I will maybe start off by asking Rebecca to check in with the government affairs folks, the IGR folks. There has to be an announcement of some kind. I think the question that we're facing, Adam, as you know, is that will cities choose to go back to the less stringent restrictions that the governor has put on Which I might note, and Rebecca knows the details of this better than I, they're both less strict and more strict in some ways. So that's what makes this complicated. They're capacity limits, they're not closures, but they placed capacity limits on a substantially larger group of entities than were affected, for example, by Mayor Walsh's orders. So I know that I did speak with Mayor Fuller in Newton. She is just going to return to implementing the governor's order, maybe with a few changes. That actually results in the reopening of gyms, for example, which have been a source of a lot of political controversy in many communities. I said to her, as I would say to anyone else, that I don't think that is the best course. I think it is best to keep as much closed as possible at the moment, if only for a short period of time until we get the numbers down. But first of all, we need to hear from Mayor Walsh what he's going to do, both in terms of substance and duration. And then we have to see whether or not any communities are going to follow him. And that includes the 6 that were with him originally. And then it also might include some additional communities on the North Shore, depending upon the results of today's meeting.
Great, thank you.
Probably move on if we can to
Yeah.
Metro Common.
Yeah, why don't we do that? And thank you for the time on this.
Sure.
All right, Eric, go to you.
Good morning, Happy New Year. Sobering way to start the week, but serious stuff, I know. Well, thanks for having me this morning. I'll just provide a quick update. Just want to say hi to Sasha. She's here in a different role, but she's actually stepped up quite a bit in the Metro Common management since Lizzie Grobel left in November. Really, she's been leading all our events work, and now she's also doing a lot of the coordination of the overall project management, which has been really helpful. So thank you, Sasha. Really great to have that support. Just a couple things wanted to remind people about. We kind of ended the year with a great research release on the zoning atlas. That was the project 9 years in the making that put together updated zoning for the 101 cities and towns. We didn't think that was going to be a huge event, but we had almost 200 people on that release, which was fantastic. And then we also in December had the driving forces workshops that explored future uncertainties. Sarah Philbrick led those up. That's also what we talked about at the fall council meeting. And we're gonna basically translate that content onto our digital hub for Metro Common. And that will be kind of our feature at the MMA coming up later this month. Really where we're headed overall in the plan is really a focus between now and the end of the plan on the policy development piece. We have drafts of many of them really in pretty good shape, and we're now about to pivot into public engagement around the policy recommendations. Our first big event is going to be focused on the dynamic and representative government with an audience of municipal leaders, mayors, managers, chairs of select boards, that kind of audience. Really, about a year ago, if you remember, our event in Arlington had a really great in-person event with this audience, and want to go back now that we have some draft recommendations to explore with the mayors and managers. We spent a lot of, we're still, obviously planning this. This will be, I think, the last week in January. I think it's the 28th. Morning event. We are doing a food donation because we're not providing actual food, but we were thinking about trying to do a series of events with municipal officials, but I think, in light of the previous conversation on COVID response and all the other things that are coming across people's plates, we really decided to focus just on one event and try to make it as great, as big and good as possible. So that's what we're focusing on for the end of January. And then we will have a few additional research releases over the spring. Data Services has been working on the housing typologies report, which looks at different neighborhood types. And I think that will have really big implications on housing and economic development policy and investment decisions. And that's going to be an early February release. And then really, I think the main focus is going to be on publicly vetting the policy recommendations. We have 20 policy chapters. We have kind of a two-track engagement strategy. One is working with subject matter experts and allies and other stakeholders who kind of live and breathe, say, on the housing recommendations. We're going to be talking to CHAPA and all the various housing organizations out there. But then we also have a track through mini grants just under $10,000 to community-based organizations, making sure that we get those voices and that input into these recommendations as well. So that's really going to be the focus between now and really late spring. And we're still pushing hard to wrap this plan up by the end of the fiscal year. So got a long ways to go still, but I think we're going to be busy and we'll do our best to land it on June 30. And then we'll spend late summer, fall, basically on the road, rolling it out and building support behind the plan.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Sandra, you have a question?
Eric, I just want to thank you and Sasha and everybody. It's just been amazing that you've kept us on track through this complicated period. So it's just thank you so much. It's just amazing to me.
Thank you, Sandra. Thanks very much.
Sam, any questions?
Lots in there, Eric and team, wonderful work. How's the zoning atlas been received so far? What's been the?
It was a great event. Like I said, this was one we thought it would be kind of the geeky planner types that would be interested in, but we had, like I said, over 200 people really from across the state. We had folks like from MassGIS who have been doing this type of work forever. And just looking at the comments at that event, people were like, wow, this is really, really impressive. I mean, I think people were really impressed with the amount of work, the amount of effort it took, but also the product. And I think we got a lot of requests like, can we do this statewide? And we're like, well, we can work with the other RPAs, and it'd be great if there were, more incentives to actually report zoning changes. And we really are hoping this will be crowdsourced so that when zoning changes do happen, that people can submit those updates like right to the atlas. It's always hard trying to keep things up to date, but I think we really are going to make a commitment to try to keep this as fresh as possible, because as we know, things are always changing, but I think it will be a valuable resource for everybody from practitioners to academics to policymakers.
Yeah, I haven't spent time with it, but I look forward to diving into it.
And I should say our data services team will be doing a series of releases basically based on that dates on the data that's in that. So for example, they will be looking at, kind of the potential yield of multifamily as one of the research products that will come out probably in a couple months down the road.
Yeah, lots of possible uses for this thing, for sure. Some of the minefields, I'm sure, but interesting.
Sandra?
Was it mostly housing related? That was my impression from talking to, I'm sorry, I haven't delved into it, but talking to the system planner in Bedford, she feels like it's largely focused on housing.
I mean, my understanding is that it does have, it has all the base zoning. It has much of the overlay zoning that's there. So I think on commercial and industrial development, that all that zoning is in there. So people can like take a look at, how much land we have zoned for industrial and, kind of look at, is it appropriate? Is it too much? Is it in the right spots? So all of that is in there. I think we're so focused on housing and multifamily in particular, and where the location of housing goes. I think that was a big emphasis at the release event, and I know that will be a focus of at least one of the first research releases. But it does extend beyond housing.
All right. Well, thank you for the time, Eric.
Thank you.
Great work. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy 2021.
Same to you.
Bye.
Right, so
We-
I'm probably looking at the dated agenda, Mark. I opened up the first Heidi email I could find in my inbox.
Yes.
So why don't we go to the climate update with
That's
Cami?
okay. So I want to do a climate update, and I'll start with a big thank you and congratulations, because there's been a tremendous amount of forward movement that Rebecca and Leah and Cami and other people on staff have been very much engaged in over the course of the last couple of weeks. I don't know if I want to call it the release or the enactment of TCI among at least a limited number of jurisdictions, which will hopefully spread to additional jurisdictions. The release of the the Commonwealth's climate plan. And we hope, I know Leah was hoping that it would be released by this morning, but I don't know if it was. Yesterday, okay, the climate bill from conference committee. So a lot to update people on, and I will turn it over to them in whatever order they wish.
I'll do a high level overview, and then I think Cami and Leah can dig in on questions, because they're all related. But I think really, as Mark said, important events in climate over the last 2 weeks, really. So we've really decided to cram it all in to the end of the year. Nothing like a deadline. So, the TCIP, they're now calling it, program was released with 4 jurisdictions signing on. And I think what's most important is that those 4 jurisdictions picked an aggressive cap. I think we were worried that they would potentially really try to water down the cap or pick something that's not meaningful. But I think they picked an aggressive cap with a strong baseline commitment to equitable investments. And I think here we will push for even more than that, that will, over the next 10 years, I think really have a meaningful effect on transportation emissions, as well as raise significant revenue that can be invested in projects to help us transform our transportation system. So a real victory, and I think a huge, I was texting with the Secretary of EEA, a huge testament to her work, but she did say that the Future of Transportation Commission was really critical in getting the buy-in internally. So it's nice to see some of those recommendations finally come into play. The state's Clean Energy and Climate Plan, they released 2 things over last week. One is their 2050 roadmap study, which is a very large technical report looking at multiple pathways to achieve our net zero goal by 2050, as well as the 2030 Clean Energy and Climate Plan, which is really, I think, the more critical document in that, there are a lot of regulatory decisions that are then attached to that plan so that we can meet the emission reductions in the different sectors. A few things I'll highlight there, although I'm sure some of you read the articles. But on the electric sector, it really kind of remains a similar course, a big commitment to offshore wind, and we saw a larger commitment to offshore wind in the climate bill, as well as a continued expansion of solar and a real commitment to keep those incentives going in multiple ways. And I think over the long term, we'll see over the next 10 years, a real desire to reform ISO, which is our regional, ISO New England, our regional federal regulating entity, to have it start focusing on a more clean future. And so kind of some first steps to get us there. In the building sector, and I want to give Cami a huge shout out. You might not know, but she is the chair of the building subcommittee for the plan, and I think really a thought leader in this space. And buildings and we've done a lot of work in the electric sector. I think the path forward is fairly clear there. The path forward in the building sector is much more challenging, but I think a huge commitment towards retrofitting there, as well as a commitment to make sector level caps on heating, and clean heating is our kind of biggest challenge. And from this, what I anticipate is that the administration is going to be pulling together a special commission on clean heating. And, from everything I've heard so far, MAPC is going to have a big role on that commission to come up with what those sector level emission limits will be, and then to come up with really what are the strategies that we need over the next 10 years to kind of make these deep retrofits and do that affordably. So I'm excited to see that. And then in both the bill and in this bill, there's a commitment to coming up with a net zero code. and filing that with BBRS. I'm hearing that by 2022, they're hoping that that net zero code will be available for adoption by cities and towns. So that's really exciting. I think that's even sooner than we've been working on, and Cami and her team have been working so hard on the building code. So a huge advancement there. That net zero code would then become statewide by 2028. So that's a real shift, and I think change, and even where I thought we would be. It's more aggressive, and I'm really excited to see that. On the transportation side, there's a commitment that all light duty vehicles sold in the Massachusetts following California will be EV by 2035, which is, again, another one of the recommendations from the Future of Transportation Commission. And, a lot of work is going to have to go in there in terms of thinking about how do you actually make that happen. But I think it's an important step. But then I think hidden in there, and most excitingly for our team, there's a commitment to reduce commute VMT by 15%, and a real desire to open up and look at the DEP rideshare regulations as a way to get at that, which gets in a lot of the things that we work on around parking and how, transit pass subsidization, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of interesting work that we're going to be able to work on. We've been asking them to look at that rideshare regulation for about 10 years now. So it's a small little thing, but I think it'll be exciting work that we get to work on with them.
Such a small thing that I don't know what it is. What is the DEP rideshare regulation? And why is DEP regulating rides?
DEP regulates with employers. They have to come up with certain mandates about how they are enforcing and trying to work towards reducing VMT, or looking at how their employers are commuting. For a long time, my understanding is this is collected via hard paper, and there are PDFs that have these plans, but there's no enforcement mechanism. But if you look at a community like Cambridge, Sam, they have taken these kind of mandates and requirements to a whole new level and really held employers accountable for trying to come up with policies that will actually change the way their employees commute. And so the goal is to kind of model the Cambridge model statewide as a way to really try to get at some of this commute VMT. And obviously, much of it is going to be up in the air. We don't know what the future of commuting is going to look like, and how much work from home will play into this. But I think that it's a small little piece in there, but I'm really excited to see it. And then Leah, do you want to talk about the climate bill?
Yeah, nothing like a good deadline. So the legislative session ends tomorrow night at midnight. The House and Senate are expected to take up the bill today and get it to the governor. It's a packed bill. It covers a lot of different areas, very similar to the piece that Rebecca was just talking about. It does include building code, and it requires DOER rather than the current Board of Building Regulations and Standards to develop it. So very in line with what was proposed by the administration. It also says within 1 year. It doesn't require it to get roped back in to the code. It sort of sets up this separate municipal opt-in program. So that's like on the buildings piece. It sets up a larger framework for reducing our emissions. It sets up that same roadmap formula, requires a reduction in emissions by 2030 of not less than 50%, which is different than the administration's 45%. By 2040, it should be 75%, and by 2050, 85%. So there is that one area of difference between the two proposals. It does also require sector-specific changes. So that's on some of the net zero. It includes critically a definition of environmental justice into our program for how large projects get reviewed. And what's really exciting about that is it really sets up a template for how that can be adopted in other sections of statute too, because right now environmental justice is only defined by a gubernatorial, and I'm forgetting the word in English right now, but something signed by the governor only. It's not through statute.
You can give it to us in another language if you want to, Leah. That would probably work.
Executive order, is that the word you're looking for?
Yes, executive order. I was like, EO, I have the initials. there's on
Woman has
economic,
spent too much time in the legislature. That's what's going on here.
too many acronyms. On workforce, they do set up a program under Mass CEC for explicitly funding those organizations that are led by minority and women-owned businesses, and also for those that are having left the fossil fuel industry to try to help them retrain for this new world of jobs that we're trying to create. Said a little bit about buildings. There's a lot of changes to DPU and their mission statement, which is going to be huge. Some realignment of mass save programs, which, you know, a lot of these are things that we've been looking at filing for next session if they didn't get through. So it's really, I think, pushing us to sort of look a little bit deeper of, okay, what's next on that list that we get to tackle should this get signed by the governor in the coming days. A bunch of stuff on renewable, including increases in wind. It also includes the energy efficiency appliance standards, which has now passed both branches at least once. So this could finally be the year that we get those through. And that's one of the areas where California surpassed us, and one of the reasons why we dropped to number 2 for energy in this past year. So lots of things to consider. The legislature doesn't have so many options if the governor finds things that are objectionable, because we are so close to that end of session timeframe. So that's something that's definitely on the mind of a lot of folks as we sort of approach these next couple hours of the session.
Yeah, I would just say overall, we've been hoping for an aggressive bill out of the legislature, and I really think this is a really important first step, good step forward. You know, I think it's important. We'll thank the new speaker that this was his first piece of legislation, and I hopefully that portends for good things to come under his leadership. We're gonna at least give him some credit for that. Hope he feels good about it. And it is much more of ambitious than I actually anticipated coming out. So I'm very happy. And I think a lot of the small changes, and I know Cammie's here, you know, things around being able to account for kind of the carbon saving emissions in the mass save programs are things that we've been working on for, you know, 5-6 years. And so, you know, particularly at the regulatory level. And so to be able to see some of these statutory changes, it's going to have a big impact on our work in a lot of these places. So it's exciting to see.
Cammie, did you want to add anything?
No, those are really comprehensive summaries. Yeah, I just echo what Rebecca just said, that there are so many things that we've been working on for years that it's just so satisfying to see kind of memorialized in both of these documents. And fingers crossed, you know, the Clean Energy and Climate Plan update right now is in draft. It's an interim document that public comment will be open through about the 3rd week in February. Then will be finalized in the spring, likely in April. I don't expect many changes, but you know, that still is just a plan. And so then we'll need the statutory changes, the legislative changes to actually enact the things that are put forward there. But the ambition in it, the detail in it is fabulous to see. And on the legislative side, fingers crossed that it gets signed into law. But yeah, really satisfying to see so many of the things we've been working on echoed there.
I would add one more thing if I could. Sandra, I'm sorry did you want to go or? Oh, okay. Just one more thing that's been going on at MAPC for you to be aware of in the Data Services Department is the formulation of a study evaluating the impact of both pricing strategies and land use on GHG. It has been a long standing effort by Rebecca and myself to get a little more statistical backup to especially what we commonly say about the impact of smart growth on GHG. And I feel like this report, which I'm actually in the process of doing a final look at this morning, is a big step in that direction. It also lays out some additional research that can happen going forward, but it's a very big first step in that direction. So adding that small item, it's not a small item to the folks in data services. They've been working very hard on it. To all of this work, I think we're seeing some real progress, some meaningful steps forward, and it is good to check the boxes off on several of these items and know that we can move on next year to some other more aggressive things. I want to thank the 3 women on this call, but also many other staff behind them who have worked to make this climate bill and TCI really happen.
Sandra, go ahead.
So thanks. So yeah, this is just an incredible presentation. I mean, I'm just so excited on these fronts. I just wanted to mention as a homeowner that feels to me to be the piece that we are lagging on under, and I'm hoping that the TCI effort can really address that. And Cami, your subcommittee, because I mean, Bedford is a municipal net zero community, great. But what does it mean for homeowners? I mean, I'm at a total loss in terms of how do I disconnect from the natural gas? I mean, sure, a heat pump, but you still need a backup system. How I can afford, what my options are, I have no idea. So I feel like that's just a huge sector that hasn't been addressed, and I'm hoping that we can really figure that piece out. So that's just.
I think you're totally right, Sandra, and that's what this governor's special commission is, I think, really having to tackle. It's a thorny issue, the whole building sector. I mean, I won't say that multifamily or commercial is actually that much easier, but I think, we really need to bring in, and I've been talking with the undersecretary over there, folks that really specialize in marketing, in, kind of educating everyone that's kind of involved. And, I know, for example, when my water heater broke, my plumber told me, don't get the efficient one. It's more expensive, right? So, but your water, your basement's flooding, you're trying to make a quick decision. So I think there's just a lot of little pieces that we need to get into place to really help homeowners, and also to drive down the cost so that, heat pumps and some of this clean heat technology really can become affordable for everyone.
One of the
that
things
just
that
takes
got
scale,
included in the
too.
bill was funding for training to the practitioners to be able to make better recommendations to homeowners. That was something that got included as well. And the program ends in like 10 years, assuming everybody gets trained. So that's like one other area where there's definitely some.
Now, I will tell you that plumber said the wrong thing to the wrong person. So
A really big piece, though, that Rebecca touched on a minute ago is that, and I think Alea did too, the realignment of both mass save and DPU processes with our climate goals. That will have a huge effect kind of across the board on a lot of these issues, and enable those incentives and this market shift and that workforce development to really go forward if those advance.
And similarly with these caps on heating, I mean, that, and there's a big DP order, it's all, an attempt to send a signal to the market of this is where we're going over the next 10 years. And so, there will be consistency in terms of, the need for utilities to play in this space. And I think a big question is going to be that mass save program, which is, billions of dollars. And, what are ways that we might need to really reform that so that it's actually, more effective and helping people make the changes they want to make.
And I'd like to chime in here. On the mass save, if I'm remembering it correctly, those efforts seem to have been spectacularly unsuccessful in the past. Cambridge, I know specifically, tried a home energy retrofit effort 10 years ago, 15 years ago, poured money into it, didn't go anywhere. I mean, it just didn't go anywhere. A slight side note on that, a startup that I actually did a little bit of work with developed an app to help commercial buildings be more energy efficient through crowdsourcing information about the building. What they found, they started as an energy play, if you will. They found that actually their bigger selling point was that it was a time-saving play. It just made working with the building more efficient. So the energy side sort of fell off the table, and it became much more about time is money, and this is a more efficient way of doing it. I share that just as an FYI of somebody who actually, a startup that actually tried to address the energy side, but ended up selling, if you will, a different product to people. I do want to just talk about EVs and the 2035 goal. And maybe more as comments. One is just the grid issues, the electricity that's needed out there, which actually leads me to another point, which is as we go to electric, the utilities actually have a huge incentive in all this. I mean, they're going to be selling more electricity. And we might collectively try to get them in the process of making EVs more affordable and available to people, since it will be their product that's going to fuel these things, which leads me to another bigger thought as I'm just sort of rambling here, which is that if you combine EVs, public transit, and work from home, basically one thing that covers all of that, an umbrella that covers all of that is electricity. And we might I'm just throwing this out there because I'm just thinking of it now. Think about an electricity budget across our transportation system. Basically, what we're trying to do is squeeze liquid fuels out of the system and make our communication, whether we're physically moving or just moving through computer screens, all available through electricity. It's a random thought. It's just happening right now, but it might be an interesting way of looking at this, because one beneficiary out of all of this will be the utility companies and all the different parts of that system. And it might be worthwhile to try to get them not just as beneficiaries, but also as payers into the system. And one last comment is hydrogen fuel cells. I've developed a middle-aged male fascination with cars. And one of the things that a lot of the sort of car geeks are talking about is hydrogen fuel cells. The battery era will be relatively short-lived. It may be 10 years or 20 years of electrics. But once hydrogen comes along, I have no idea about that. They may just be talking whatever, but it's an interesting question at any rate. So lots of comments.
The roadmap study really digs into some of these issues and looks at different pathways, and the electrification pathway is one of the least cost, kind of biggest benefit pathways. So I really, the state didn't pick out of the pathways. It kind of said, here are the different ways that we can get to net zero. But, I think everyone is envisioning electrification future, and transmission obviously is a really important piece of that. I think particularly we're going to have regional conversations, and I can actually imagine some of our more rural RPAs really getting involved in how can we really kind of come up with a planning process that comes up with, we need thoughtful transmission, particularly from Canada and Maine, and how are we, so we can access some of the more large scale renewables that are up there. How can the environmental community, be involved in a way, and the planning community to come up with a process where, everyone can get on board. Right now, there's a lot of kind of fighting even amongst kind of the more preservationist side of the environmental community and those that are looking for the transmission benefits. So I think that will be one of the big challenges over the next 10 years is really increasing and improving transmission capacity.
So a random question just came to mind that maybe we can leave an answer to for another day, but is anywhere in all of this, any thought on how we're going to plan for the eventual closure of gas stations and how to clean up their tanks and what we might be able to do with the property?
Well, we can take back some of that underground storage tank money that's going into the transportation budget. No, I think that's a big piece, and Cami can speak to it more about some of the work that we're doing, looking at, I know Josh Eichen was really looking at kind of the loss of industrial space or the transformation of industrial space, particularly in some of our more urban, corridors, and what to do with that. Cami, do you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I haven't dug through every bit of the roadmap study yet. I don't think there's too much that addresses that at this point, and I think it's not necessarily a 10-year issue. It's probably a little bit longer afield still, but it is something we definitely need to be thinking about. I think a lot of it does depend on how we're able to kind of reuse and recycle those spaces. Because for the interim, there still will be some fuel mixing, especially for diesel. There still will be the need to kind of have reduced carbon diesel and other forms of biofuels. So there might be the use for the stations like that. There was a lot of talk earlier on in kind of the electric vehicle transition of how we do use those gas stations. Either their charging stations have popped up, especially the DC fast charging at gas stations. Sam talked about fuel cells. Fuel cells actually have a very quick kind of recharge, similar to a gas station. So there was talk a little bit earlier on when those were seen kind of as vying more one-on-one with EVs, that maybe everything would that'd be an easier transition to go to fuel cells because you could do it at gas stations. The technology hasn't been there yet, but if that does kind of start to take over, then that's a place where the gas stations may still become, still kind of use the same function. But I think some of that depends, and just to your point about remediation too, similarly to how we have brownfields programs and things like that set up, we're going to need to be looking at how we deal deal with the toxic kind of tanks and other, if there's leakage into the soils, what are we doing in those spaces to make them usable? But that's a place too where we've developed really good programs for solar and other things like that too. So a lot still to be decided. And if they do dig more into it and we discover that as we go, we can share more with you too.
Yeah, and similarly, I think, we have to really think about mechanics. I think, EVs, one of the benefits of owning an EV is that the engine is much, much simpler. And so the need for maintenance and tuning it's much less than with internal combustion engine. And so in particular, for example, there's a lot of work that folks are trying to do to get dealerships on board. Dealerships make a huge amount of their money, through actually kind of fixing and repairing vehicles. And so I think there's not an incentive from them to necessarily push electric vehicles in the same way because of the loss of the number of times you have to get your car fixed. So there's a lot of those problems we have to solve over the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, makes sense.
Just briefly comment on the servicing side. I'm leasing a Tesla on a 3-year lease. When I picked it up, I said, where do I go to get it serviced? And this kid who's like 27, of course, and knows everything about electric cars said, he kind of looked at me, looked at the car and kind of said, 3 years, you probably won't need to get this serviced at all. And I was like, okay, all right. So yeah, different world, completely different world.
I drive a town-issued Chevy Bolt, and I've been driving it for like 2+ years now, not serviced once. I'm knock on wood, I'm probably going to go out and won't start or something, but it, nothing, just nothing. Just, it starts and goes and stops. All on command.
Same here, with the exception of the words town issued. So.
I would have driven a Bolt, but COVID shut down the GM factory when I was trying to get a car.
So you had to get the Tesla.
Had to go for the Tesla.
Too bad.
Oh, I did. I wanted the Bolt. I honestly did want the Bolt. But the Tesla's cool. Elon Musk is not a stupid guy. I'll give you that.
The Rivian is the next wave of luxury. Check that one out.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you very much for this. Any final questions or comments? All right. Well, great work. A lot more work to do, but we're very thankful for all of it. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Thanks, Cammie. Thanks, Leah.
Thanks, all.
All right. So we're running down on time, but it looks like we need to review the draft agenda for the next executive committee meeting on January 27th. Heidi, could you bring that up? Do you happen to have that handy?
While Heidi brings that up, I would note that the one major substantive issue is the review and adoption of the CEDS, the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. That is a plan that we are required to do by the Economic Development Administration in our capacity as the Economic Development District for Greater Boston. Betsy Cowan and her staff have been working aggressively on the CEDS now for a year, and it's a good, strong document. Rebecca and I have been through it a number of times. It definitely has a different flavor from previous CEDS. They're updated annually, but we call that the little CEDS. The big CEDS, which is what this is every 5 years. And it definitely has a different flavor. It's more focused on workforce. It's more focused on equity. It's heavily focused on COVID recovery, all of which I think is appropriate. At the same time, it's going to look different to the executive committee that it has in the past. And I will admit to a slight concern that some of our members might feel it has moved in a direction that they find somewhat surprising and not necessarily completely consistent with their political perspective. So I think it's a good document. I would like it to be approved. Strongly would like it to be approved. Would ask you folks, if you could, to take a look at it and hopefully be supportive. And I know that Betsy is going to be sending it out. I think the target date was the 7th, so that would of course be this week. And I'll check in with her after this meeting to make sure that it's ready to move forward. That is the one big item. We could add another item, but Honestly, I'm not sure we want to push these meetings to an hour and a half if they can be done a little bit sooner. And right now it's still an hour and a half. I'm not totally sure we will need quite that much time. So I'm inclined to leave the agenda largely as it is, unless any officers feel differently, or unless Rebecca remembers something that maybe I'm forgetting and didn't put into the agenda that we were supposed to do this January.
Looks acceptable.
Adam, I
to me.
think if you want to call on Sandra.
I'm sorry, I can't see Sandra. Sandra, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna say that looking at the agenda, I thought it might need more than an hour and a half, but if we think we can get it done, but there's an awful lot in there between the legislature and the economic development strategy. Me, but it should be fine. Anyway, no reason.
Well, then we definitely won't add anything more then. Okay.
Yeah, we had talked about, and I think we can save till February, we brought our kind of initial legislative priorities to the December meeting. There also is a document the team has been working on in terms of our recovery priorities. But I think that a good lead in might be to do the SEDS in January and do the recovery priorities in February.
Sounds reasonable.
I think that sounds good. Anyway, it's not going to be before the filing deadline anyway, so I don't think we gain any. I think we gain a lot more by waiting until February and polishing that up and letting the staff spend their time dealing with the filing deadline before this executive committee meeting.
Sandra, go ahead.
When is the deadline? When is the filing deadline?
15th, I believe.
January 15th?
No, January. Am I wrong about that, Rebecca?
No, that's right.
No, January 15th.
But we still don't know whether we're going to get transportation or economic development before then, or whether climate change is going to get signed or not. So yeah, our poor team has got a lot of work to do in the next week.
Go ahead, Sandra. You're on mute. Sandra, you're on mute.
If either of those two bills don't get signed, is there any precedent for getting things done quickly and early in the session? I mean, it just doesn't happen, right?
Not really. I mean, the problem is it needs to be refiled. It needs to go through the hearing process. It's very, very difficult to do a bond bill rapidly, even though you would think that they would understand the importance, particularly of the economic development bond bill to our recovery.
And the other challenge is that with the new speaker, that means new committee chairmanships, and that whole process has to play out, which, traditionally nothing gets done until the budget in those years. We'll see whether, given the current circumstances, something changes this year, but that can take months.
So refresh my memory, do you need us to vote to endorse that agenda or just review? Okay, great. Any other comments on the agenda? All right, next item, date of our next meeting is scheduled right now for Monday, February 1st. Looks good to everybody? Okay. Any other new business not known at the time of the posting of this agenda?
I've got a couple of just big ticket items just to kind of put in the parking lot, and they don't have to be discussed here, but one could be potentially, which is because it's the drum that I want to keep banging, is the police reform. Can we just get a quick update on that? For something for future discussions is just the condition of the state budget going forward. It seems, particularly in the COVID discussions, that there's a good amount of expenditure, and I'm curious what that means on the tax side in the out years. And then on a much more internal thing, Rebecca and or Mark, I ask you this every time. Mid-year budgeting for MAPC is going to start. When are we going to kick into that? Because I'm curious where things stand in terms of you guys and how it's looking.
So traditionally, the way the process works is in January, we start our initial process here, collecting information from directors, and then we'll have our meetings in February, in preparation for the March executive committee and then council meeting.
Okay.
But-
I'll ask you 3 more times before we actually sit down and meet. So, but I'm just curious how it's looking internally. But the other 2 are just bigger, much bigger picture. Can we get 12 seconds on police reform? What happened with it? And then also, I am curious in the longer term about the state's budget and what's going on with that.
So I guess I would say on police reform, we passed a reasonably strong bill. The governor's recommendations weakened the bill, but I don't think they did so substantially. I think it was a fairly strong bill, and we did get most of it. I was deeply disheartened by his direct threat to veto the bill, and the ease with which the 2 branches acceded to his recommended changes, which on most other topic areas, I think you would not have seen. I think you would have seen some legislative pride and resistance to the changes proposed by the governor, but we did not see that in this case. So I'm more worried about the meaning of the politics behind the changes than I am about the substance of the changes. We will need to continue to push on a lot of these police reform issues. The 2 that are probably of most direct concern to municipal government are the question of leaving civil service and also the question of arbitration. Those are both very complicated questions. The second far more complicated than the first, but the first isn't easy. We will continue to work on those, but I've tried to emphasize that we will also maintain our relationship with and seek some guidance from the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus about what some of their priorities might be that might not be exactly the same, but not be dissonant with the municipal priorities. I think that the issue is whether or not we can get a second bill. And honestly, I think that that's fairly unlikely. But I think it needs to be a high priority of ours, and I know it will be a high priority of many other people's. It's hard for me to believe that the changes in leadership on the House side will make that easier. On the revenue side, yes, we need additional revenue. Need additional revenue for a while. Arguably dug more into the rainy day fund than we actually should be. But, that helps us also to accomplish our goals right now. Seems to be no appetite by either branch or by the governor for meaningful additions of revenue. I think they still hope that the federal government will bail us out of our misery here. I think the sad thing is that many sectors have done quite well during this economy. I often tell people, I feel like financially, it's probably one of the better times in my life, and I could readily pay more taxes. And there are a lot of people in that category. But I have to be honest and say, I don't see that changing either with Ron Mariano, Karen Spilka, or Charlie Baker. No one of them has said more taxes. In addition to preparing the piece on recovery, the staff is also preparing a piece on revenue that will eventually go to the legislative committee and to the executive committee. There are maybe a few bright spots on that. The governor did propose an increase in the deeds fee that would go to climate. We and a number of other organizations are proposing that be increased a little more and go to both climate and housing. I think the deeds fee issue, the transfer tax issue may get a little more serious hearing this time around, but every single effort at increasing revenue is an uphill battle. And I think it's likely to remain an uphill battle.
Okay, thank you.
All
Those
right,
were my questions.
Thank you, Sam. So I need to go to my next engagement.
I had only one small matter of other business that I'll read to you, which is that, I've been checking in with Erin, trying to see how she's doing. And she writes, thanks for checking in on me. This is this morning. I will not be at the officers meeting, but I hope to be at the executive committee meeting later this month. My husband is getting treatment, but stable, hopefully progressing soon. So I just wanted to let you know that. Doesn't have to be in the minutes, Heidi, but I just wanted to let you know that that's what she has to say. And hopefully we'll get her back on the third Wednesday of the month.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Mark. All right, with that, I guess I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you both. There's only two options for seconds and for motions and seconds here. Motion's been made and seconded. Call the roll. Sandra?
Yes.
Sam?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all.
Great meeting.
All right. Thank you,
Thanks, Heidi.
everybody.
Thanks, Sasha.
Take care.